It has been a much quieter offseason than Phillies fans have hoped, and it is time to start having some difficult conversations. Not about the future of this season, as I still believe the Phillies are in a better spot than a lot of organizations, but about this window for this Phillies team and how long it may longer be open. I want to dive into what players may not be a significant part of the long-term future of this Phillies team, as we have been led to believe, and really looking ahead. And what particularly sparked this overall video here was this article on PhilliesNation.com. Shout out to my guy Jovan Alfred, I believe is how you pronounce that. Really nice guy that I've interacted with online a couple times and does some really good work as far as the Phillies and really all across Philly sports. But he wrote this article on Phillies Nation saying 5 Phillies leaving Philadelphia in the new year, and kind of phrased this with the calendar officially flipping to 2025. Here are 5 Phillies players who might not be in the big league club for the entire year. So he took the stance of these either being trade candidates, guys who may just see their contract expire after the conclusion of next season and move on. And I thought it was really interesting to kind of reflect on and see, wow, this era of Phillies baseball may look a little bit different than most of us may expect. So let's dive right into what he has for us. I want to start off with number 1. He has Ranger Suarez here. And Jovan writes, after acquiring Jesus Luzardo in a trade from the Miami Marlins last month, the Phillies could move on from Suarez before the start of the 2025 season or at the trade deadline. The 29-year-old left-handed pitcher is currently up for arbitration, which hasn't been settled for the 2025 season. However, Suarez is also set to be an unrestricted free agent at the end of 2025. And this is most of where the slant is coming with, is the belief that the Phillies do not want him to just walk away in free agency. And I do think the Luzardo trade does complicate things a little bit. Now, granted, to discuss Ranger, he's been pretty excellent for this Phillies team that just last season pitched 27 games, 150.2 innings, only allowed 14 home runs, had 145 strikeouts. Really good for a starting pitcher there. 140 hits allowed, just 8.4 hits per 9 innings. His ERA did climb up to 3.46 with a 1.20 whip, but let's not forget that he had one of the best ERAs in baseball for the entire first half of the season, was legitimately in that Cy Young category. Then he did deal with some tightness, some back issues, and looked like a dead arm for a stretch of time, but still got it out when it mattered most. A guy who I trust with my life with the playoffs on the line. We've seen him deliver on the biggest stage, and I'm not in a rush to move on from Ranger Suarez. To be perfectly frank, I hope this is not the case. That I understand we've basically seen no traction as far as a new deal incoming or any sort of extension being talked about. We know that he did change ownerships and is now represented by Scott Boras, which is always a concern when that is the case there. But I do think Ranger, while it is seemingly likely and certainly has increased since the Luzardo deal has gone down, is not a guy that I am itching to kick out to Philadelphia. But the other names were even more surprising to me. And to jump into the next one, Kyle Schwarber here. And Jovan writes, Schwarber is one of several players whose contract will expire at the end of the 2025 season. Phillies fans would hate to see Schwarber leave, as he's provided the fan base with so many great moments in the postseason and regular season. And this is one that did hit me. Kyle Schwarber is a winner. Kyle Schwarber is an excellent baseball player, and Kyle Schwarber is a guy that I want representing this Phillies organization moving forward. Now, with that said, Father Time catches up to everyone, and it does make me wonder if the Phillies are believing that that could be the case with Kyle Schwarber. He will be 32 entering next season, but coming off a season in which he had 38 home runs, 104 RBIs, 106 walks, which is why he's in that leadoff spot despite the constant complaining there. 142 hits, 197 strikeouts. A guy who we know his limitations, that he's basically landlocked to the DH position at this point. There was the effort to play him in left field, and when you had Castellanos in right field and Schwarber in left, and by the way, shout out Cassie, who's gotten significantly better in the field than when he first came to Philadelphia, but it just was not the best usage of the defense in the outfield right there. That's what made Johan Rojas so important and kind of has compounded into a lot of these problems we had. But to just talk about Schwarber for who he is, he's everything that this Phillies team should want. And what makes me wonder is if this is a guy that they're not interested or maybe don't believe they have the inside track to re-sign, what does that mean for the franchise moving forward? I think he is as much of a leader as a guy like Bryce Harper, and while Bryce is much more of a face of the city type guy, Kyle Schwarber is a guy who makes sure the ship is running tight. That he seems like he is constantly on guys all the time, talked about what a great locker room presence he is, and that is a guy that I think must be back on this Phillies team at the end of 2025, despite what that article states there. Now, to continue on, a couple of the names that I did want to hop into. Next up, JT Realmuto, and this is one I certainly see eye to eye with the article, and it states, after a down 2024 season due to injury, Realmuto could be playing his final year in Philadelphia in 2025. The 33-year-old catcher is entering the last season of his 5-year, $115.5 million contract he signed in January 2021. Realmuto played in 99 games last season, the fewest that he's played since the COVID-19 season in 2020, which was only 47 games that year. The three-time All-Star catcher underwent right knee meniscectomy surgery in June and was on the injured list for over a month. Despite playing in less than 100 games last season, Realmuto slashed 256, 322, and 429 with 14 home runs and 47 RBIs. Now, I like JT Realmuto. He's a guy that I have a great deal of respect for the way that he handles the game on a night-to-night basis. Guy who constantly wants to be in the lineup in Iron Man at the catcher position, which is becoming more and more rare. But I do think when I speak about Father Time, he's an even more likely candidate there. JT's been incredibly healthy, much more than you would expect or believe to be the case for a center and a guy who logs the amount of innings behind the plate that he does like that. But I also saw a significant drop-off in the power numbers. It did not feel like Realmuto was this balance in the lineup the way that things are really built out to be or the expectation was. And I also will note, feels like we very quickly dropped this best catcher in baseball phrase that was thrown out there so often during this push to give him a contract extension or give him a new deal there. That Bryce Harper was leading the charge with that. I didn't hear that all of last year and even dating a little bit back to that. And I do think that is a little telling. Now, granted, Garrett Stubbs is brought back to the organization this year. Does seem like there's going to be a more conscious decision to limit the innings or games played for Realmuto in the hopes that that swings back some of the power numbers or ability at the plate. If that is the case, we can start to revisit things a little bit, but I'm not sure that I'm banking on that. I think we might have to have an honest take that JT Realmuto, we might be at the kind of the downside of his career. It's totally understandable for a catcher, a guy that is 33 years old, but that also is something that the Phillies need to address and replace pretty quickly. Now, to continue on with this, kind of a surprising name on the list here, Max Kepler. And Jovan writes, after the Austin Hayes experiment failed last season, the Phillies hope Max Kepler can bring some offense and defense to the outfield in 2025. Philadelphia surprisingly signed Kepler to a one-year, $10 million contract last month, which did not excite the fan base. The Phils expect Kepler to be their everyday left fielder, despite him not playing left field in his 10-year tenure with the Minnesota Twins. The 31-year-old outfielder battled through multiple injuries in 2024, a left patellar tendonitis and hip, and reportedly underwent core surgery. Kepler hit .253 with 8 home runs and 42 RBIs. Even though he only played in 105 games, the veteran outfielder hit .273 against left-handed pitching. However, for his career, Kepler is better against right-handed pitching, slugging .243 at the plate. And I think the assessment here, which I more or less agree with, Kepler is a Band-Aid fix to this Phillies team. This is not the left fielder of the future that I think a lot of us had our eyes on or were hoping to find out what the answer to that question was in left field. This feels nothing more than a lottery ticket that Dave Dombrowski is scratching with the hopes of better return on his investment than most would expect. I don't know if that is the way to play it. I'm still kind of surprised that they let Austin Hayes just move on, to be perfectly honest. For Hayes specifically, he certainly didn't jump off the page to me, but he's also a guy that I thought like we didn't have the proper outlook on. He obviously battled a ton of stuff while he was here, was in and out of the lineup, and had the kidney infection and a couple other weird things that he dealt with. I thought he looked fine for a couple of stretches, and based on the way the Phillies talked about him at the time and what they gave up to bring him to the organization in the first place, it would have made more sense for me for them to just run it back with Hayes rather than bringing Kepler. Now, maybe I'm completely wrong on this. Maybe Max Kepler just was battling injuries himself and can have a career year this season. Obviously, would be excellent for all parties involved, the Phillies included, if that is the case. But I do think this feels a little bit more like a Band-Aid fix rather than any sort of long-term issue that's been addressed, which is sort of being a little bit of a theme with this Phillies team. Now, to end out with the last name on this list, a pretty familiar name on this channel, with that being Alec Bohm. And he writes, the 28-year-old third baseman isn't set to become a free agent until 2027, but Bohm's name has been floated around in various trade rumors in the offseason, which is not good heading into 2025. The former first-round pick made his first All-Star team in 2024, hitting .280 with 15 home runs and 97 RBIs. In the first half of the regular season, Bohm played at an All-Star level, slashing .295, .348, and .482 with 11 home runs and 70 RBIs. However, Bohm's production took a massive dip in the second half. The 29-year-old infielder slugged .251, .299, and .382. Woof. With 4 home runs and 27 RBIs. Bohm's second half struggles were apparent in the postseason as he hit just .077 in 14 at-bats. Bohm might not be on the roster if there was a deal to be had that would help this Phillies team this offseason. Given the lack of talent at third base and in free agency, Bohm seems to remain with this Phillies team. And that does seem like the outlook. I think if there was any pathway to upgrade the roster with Alec Bohm being sent out, the Phillies would have pulled the trigger weeks ago. That obviously has not been the case. It isn't something that comes together. And I think while there's still a lot of time until pitchers and catchers report and we begin looking at next season on the field, I do think it's becoming more likely than not that Alec Bohm returns to this Phillies organization. Now, I don't think that's going to be excellent for morale. We've had the critiques about Bohm and the way that he handles himself and sort of his personality or immaturity at stretches already. And when you factor in just the constant trade rumors that really did flood the timelines for the first couple weeks or maybe even months of this offseason here, I don't know the version of Alec Bohm that is going to show up to training camp this year. I don't know if the Phillies know what they're getting either. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out. I also think the biggest part of this question is if you do believe that Aiden Miller is that replacement at third base and is going to be ready as soon as next season, then I understand the hesitancy to not want to hand out this big time deal to a third baseman because you have this guy in the wing. But are we sure that this man is going to be ready to step in from day one in the lineup and help this Phillies team contend for a World Series? It feels a little bit to me like the Phillies are trying to split the difference with two different timelines, and that just generally does not work out. Now, who knows? We've seen exceptions to every rule, and there are guys who can make a day one impact from the majors, but I do think that is a lofty goal for a guy that is just making his debut there. So ultimately, we will see what happens with Alec Bohm and each name on this list. Shout out to Jovan for writing out that article. Some really good stuff, and as usual, we're going to keep chopping things up right here on Phillies Digest. Hopefully some more moves to come with this Phillies team. I have a hard time believing they are fully done, but it certainly has been far quieter in the rumor streets than I expect to be the case at this point. But let me know what you guys think in the comments about those 5 names. Who is the most likely to return to this Phillies team? I want to hear what you guys think out of that in the comments below. As always, appreciate each and every one of you guys for tuning in. Make sure you're smashing that subscribe button if you have not already. Drop a like on this video here. I'll be back talking to you next time right here on Phillies Digest. Peace.